Grow, Sell, and Retire is a podcast for aspirational entrepreneurs and inspirational business owners who want to work less, earn more, and even more importantly, have an awesome time while doing it. Your host, B.D. Dalton, author of True Gravity, is here to give you the systems, processes, and actions for you to create the wealth that you've always dreamt about. Get your pencil, paper, and brain ready for secrets and top tips from his 25 years of experience in helping people build wealth. Here's your host, B.D. Dalton.
Hey everybody, B.D. Dalton here from Grow, Sell, and Retire podcast, secrets for the lazy overachiever. And today's podcast there's been two people that have actually really changed my life with their books. And one of them is my guest today on the podcast, name's Mark Tibergien. He is CEO of BNY Pershing, and he's written multiple books, and they're usually about selling a financial advisory business or being engaged in the financial advice business. But the funny thing is that all of the principles that he has in the book and the things that he'll talk about today, even though they really focus on financial advice businesses, you can apply the principles over a wide range of businesses that can make lots of little changes that really make lots of big differences. So, written a book in 1995, Practice Made Perfect, and then how to value and sell your practice, your financial advisory practice, and then Practice Made More Perfect in 2011. And he's actually written another book in 2016, The Enduring Advisory Firm. And I'm really hoping that you'll pay attention here, because even though we talk about financial advice businesses, this isn't just about the money. It's about the systems you put in place and the biggest mistakes that people make when either buying or selling a business or even working in one. So please be my guest and listen to this interview with Mark Tibergien.
Welcome to the show, Mark.
Glad to be here.
Thank you very much. I remember this was the first time we met. We were in sunny Tuscany with quite a few investment advisors talking about succession planning and what they were going to do with their business. And can you remember
that was probably the most difficult that was the most difficult conference I've ever been to be in Tuscany talking about business.
Yeah, and the wine and the pasta and the sunshine. I think we didn't have a day of rain or any sort of weather besides probably 85 degree warmth. It was great stuff, and it was funny throughout that conversation or that whole conversation, the conference. You got a nickname. What was the nickname that we gave you throughout that time frame? Because we had Mr. Hurley in the room too, didn't we?
I think I was the good Mark and he was the bad Mark, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. Because
you might have another name.
No. That's actually the one we had. We had evil Mark and good Mark. And good Mark because you said, "Here's how things are going, and here's the good things." And evil Mark is kind of on the other side of the financial equation and looking to make sure that he and his investors can get in at a good price on when they're buying in on their investment advisors. So he became evil Mark because he said, "No, that's not the way anything works. Here's how you work." So we had some good banter there. But it really came back and it's now more than 20 years since you wrote your first book. And how does that feel? And now that you've written your book last year and it came out, how does it feel to have now 20 years of success or 20 years of being an author?
Well, actually, it feels great. Truth is that I started my career as a journalist. I wrote for general publications. In fact, my first job was reading and writing obituaries for the radio, and some days I feel I've come full circle. So, it's great to be able to memorialize things in books, and the columns that I get to write each month is a way to keep my fingers in my chosen career from the beginning, and it's fun to look back on it, to leave that kind of legacy.
That's great. Really looking at it. So what brought you, or what things have changed in the books and what you've seen in the industry that made you go from Practice Made Perfect and then actually Practice Made More Perfect now to the Enduring Advisory Firm? What have you seen that's changed in just business in general, and then how it applies to the advisory firm in today's world?
Well, I've been in and around this business for about 40 years, and the the change has been more evolutionary up until about a decade ago when it became more revolutionary. I think that there were several things that really served as a catalyst for that change. The first was recognition that the financial planning profession actually was a proper profession where people could build their craft just like attorneys or accountants or others. The second was that the marketplace changed to force more transparency and lower costs. And I think financial professionals decided that they wanted to be on the side of the client instead of on the side of the product, and that was significant. But probably the biggest change is that for most of my time around the business, at least up until a decade ago, the practices were really an extension of the individual's personality. They were what I refer to as lifestyle practices. And today what we see are more truly professionally managed businesses where people are thinking about strategy and structure and people and process and managing the profits. And so it's a changing dynamic because it's not just about how you deliver advice, but how you actually manage an enterprise that delivers value to clients.
That's really big. And since you come not only from a journalism background, but you also come from an accountancy background and consultancy, are you seeing that spills over, or from things that you've seen, not that you're doing it a lot right now, but things that you've seen, is that kind of been going also into the accountancy world where accountants are becoming more consultants versus bookkeepers and people that are just filing taxes?
Well, I think that as we look at how professions evolve, there's always this risk of being commoditized in what you do and finding ways to add value. I think that, frankly, what has unfolded in the accounting profession is probably something the advisor profession needs to emulate, in that we always have to recognize individuals have a technical specialty, number one, and number two, they might have some other specialty, like the types of clients that they serve. So in my case, my evolution went from writing to an investment management firm, to a valuation firm, to an accounting firm, to now a clearing and custody firm. And each of these have been either directly or on the periphery of the financial services profession. And one of the things that is clear in the accountancy profession is that when they think about who their optimal client is, the relationship doesn't begin and end with taxes or begin and end with audits, but rather it begins and ends with the goals of the client, and all of that is being touched by financial decisions, emotional decisions, transition decisions, and ultimately wealth decisions. So the connectivity is very clear, but not everybody is able to design a relationship with their clients that brings that all together. So it's not unlike, for example, Steve Jobs creating the iPhone, where it was really more about how do I design something that people will use that they don't even know about. And I think that's been the issue for both clients and financial professionals, that instead of extrapolating the past, think about how do you observe people dealing with their issues today.
And the issues are changing. I mean, with the longevity of people and how much longer now we have to go, especially with governments not being able to step up and fund us to the level that we think that they need to. It's a big challenge when we come back to look at the lifestyles and how people are going to have to live, not only financially but physically, for their entire life, and fund that. Especially in the UK, we don't have as much of a problem because of the NHS, but in the US, paying for that long-term health care and long-term care itself, it's going to be a big challenge for advisors in general.
I think that's true. 60 is the new 40, and there are implications for that as we contemplate how we exist, and even for the financial strengths of the governments that support us. It is a universal truth in Western countries that there is a higher reliance on agencies and governments to support us, whether it's healthcare or retirement or risk. And at some point, that dependency has to shift back to the individual, at least to the extent that they are not wholly dependent on a faceless agency to manage their welfare. And so, and frankly, when you think about it, as individuals, the more you're dependent on somebody else or something else, the less flexibility you have, and it impacts the relationships you have with others. So for that reason, I believe that one of our missions as a profession in financial services is to think about how do we teach our clients beginning at a very early age to establish some form of financial independence, to be in control of their destiny instead of being victims of their destiny.
That's huge. That's one of those things, and no matter what business you're in, to think about that is that you're buying opportunities in the future with your investments instead of just sitting back and waiting on somebody to take care of you. Doesn't matter what profession you're in, it's really taking control of your destiny. People talk about that, but they don't do a lot of it. So when we look at businesses,
and in fact, I was just going to say to that, since you tied in the U.S. angle on the question, one of the things that is so interesting is that more than 60% of American citizens rely on Social Security for almost all of their retirement income, and the average net worth of an American adult is around $60,000. So you think about what that means for the choices people made in the past and the choices they have to make in the future. That how is that going to impact the quality of life, let alone whether or not they have peace of mind?
It's a very big thing, and that was one of the big things. Like when I came over here originally in 2002, went out door knocking to build my business, and when I knocked on people's doors over here, and they said they were a pensioner. In the U.S., that was great because that meant that usually you retired and you had some CDs, some savings, you had a retirement account. But over here, that meant that you were living off the state. It means that you are only collecting your dole, your paycheck from the government. So I thought I'd hit the mother lode, and I really hadn't. And it's just that it's really that switch from us running our own freedom and having an entrepreneurial mindset in the States because we've kind of been forced to, versus people that in that point in time were living in that socialistic state that the company will take care of me or the state will take care of me. So it's a big gap to overcome for advisors in general, and then also business owners thinking that they're going to make whatever to be able to retire and have those choices in retirement. But when we come back to the thing,
and it's usually a consequence rather than a planned outcome. I love, for example, what happens in Australia with their superannuation, virtually forced retirement savings program that puts people in a much better position to live the last third of their lives with some degree of financial independence than we have in almost any other Western civilization.
They've taken, and I think that's why a lot of UK, US are looking to the retirement plans and some of the insurance norms that you get in Australia and trying to apply them to the markets that we have. And it's quite interesting to how they've actually done, as you said, the forced retirement planning. And it's a good thing. When we come back to looking at businesses, and you've valued quite a few businesses, what do you think when somebody's looking as a business owner and they're thinking about their business that they're living in, is their retirement plan? What is the one big mistake that they make when they're 2, 3, 4, 5 years from selling that they don't do right, or you've seen that they make? And it might not just be one, but what are some of the mistakes that business owners are making when they think that they're sitting in their retirement, which is their business?
Well, I think the first mistake they make is only beginning to think about it 5 years out. I think that one of the things that is for certain is when you have direct control over an investment like a business, you have to think about how do you create not only value but transferability in the enterprise. So when I look at how business owners, and for much of my profession before I got directly into financial services, I dealt with all types of of companies, from automobile dealerships to Hallmark card shops to Goodyear tire resellers. So you kind of look across different businesses and you begin to understand some things. And one that I understand is that there is a tendency to have a death grip on our business, meaning that sometimes we think we're invincible or we don't trust others in the organization. And so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy about the lack of transferability in a business like that. I think the second big mistake that I see consistently, including in financial services, is that people fail to develop other people. There is one of my favorite lines that I often use as a mantra to guide me is that the greatest indignity that we can commit against another is to underestimate them. And we do this by expecting little of them. And I think of this in business often is that we may tend to denigrate the people who we work with rather than invest in them and look at them as part of our value proposition. I think that there is also a tendency to view profitability as a consequence of decisions rather than thinking about how one can actively manage the profitability. When we look at the value of businesses, there's a simple formula that I often have in my head. It's cash flow divided by risk minus growth. To the extent that you can enhance cash flow, minimize risk or uncertainty, and manage to growth, then you are going to be building a business of value. So if there are any of your behaviors within a business that don't align with that, then those are the things that you have to begin to contemplate how you change.
That's amazing. No, so those three things, and I think that people don't really think about the risk to their business. And I'm helping one of the universities here run a think tank around succession planning in family businesses. And one of the things we're having here is now that vehicles have to go to mostly electric by 2020. We have quite a few family businesses here around the Jaguar plants that are supplying things that deal with combustion engines. So they're trying to have to figure out what are they going to do. And say, because if these combustion engines are going away, what are they going to make? And they really don't. That's a huge risk to every part of the equation. You just put the cash flow over risk minus growth. They're going to lose their growth, their cash flow, and huge risk. But they just bury their head, and they've now been handed a 5-year, not death sentence, but a catalyst of change.
Yeah, that's so true, and it's not just the fuel that vehicles need, but whether or not people will even need to own a car, which is another transformational part of the business. I mean, when we look at all the things that you and I have grown up with that we take for granted, and now I think about how little I drive and how much I ride, you begin to say, why would you spend that much money to own a car when somebody can drive you there and you can still have a drink and not worry about it?
That's true, so, and we're becoming a rider economy. It's amazing the amount, and actually over here in the UK, probably even more than there in some of the outlying states because our cities. Because I don't have a lot of friends in the States that get in taxis, but over here, it's quite a you're in a taxi probably 4 or 5 times a week. It's an amazing transformation, and then now hopefully at some point in time going to driverless cars will be very interesting. So when we're looking at I'm sorry, I'm in the UK 3 or 4 times a year, and I find that there's great peace of mind in knowing that I don't have to remember how to turn left or right, that somebody else is doing it for me. yeah, letting people just handle that. Sometimes I have to question even though I've been over here for a long time, when I come back from the continent and come back from the States, remembering which country I'm in as to which way I'm going. It's quite a challenge sometimes when you're sitting thinking about something else. So you talk. So you have your idea of your cash flow over risk minus growth, but when you look at valuing businesses, what's been you said we went from evolutionary to revolutionary. Has that affected pricing when people are looking at buying businesses, even in the RIA space or in the investment space? Has it changed that much?
Well, I would say that there are several things that drive the valuation, the cost of money being one, but the unique dynamics of the business itself. I think what's interesting, one of the phenomenons is that there are a couple of phenomenons. One is that professionally managed firms tend to create more capacity to grow, and so not only do they have a higher numerator, that cash flow, but they have a higher or a different denominator in that the growth rate tends to be superior and sustained. And so by definition, both of those things enhance value. But ironically, smaller advisory firms, and I'm not saying that this is the right thing, but it is a fact, is that smaller advisory firms don't tend to have meaningful cash flow or profitability, and they don't tend to have meaningful growth. And so what buyers and sellers of small advisory practices tend to do is rely on a multiple of revenue as a valuation focus, and they tend to be historically oriented. So I think one of the things that's happened is that small advisory firms are valued way above where they should be, and large advisory firms are probably valued below where they should be. So the question now for buyers and sellers of these firms, and it's true, frankly, in any other industry, but for buyers and sellers of these firms, they have to be conscious of the fact that if the cash don't flow, the deal shouldn't go. If they can't amortize the purchase price over a reasonable period of time, then they need to think twice, because it's an investment choice. Do I put the money into cash or into equities or into fixed income, or do I buy a small, closely held business that is dependent on one individual? And I think it's important that people have that perspective whenever they're pricing a business for buying or selling.
Whatever business it is, that's how soon are you going to get return on your investment? Because if it's going to take you 5, 6, 7 years, that has to be a big investment. It better be a big advantage in 5 or 7 years to whatever your exit strategy is. So exit strategies. Yeah. If we're looking at that, are you seeing? And I had a conference on Tuesday, and I had 50 people in the room, and for the first time ever, I asked, would you rather, put your hands up, would you rather have a big wad of money in the bank, or would you rather build your business for succession so that you could have an investment for the rest of your life that you could hand on to your heirs? And for the first time ever, I did not have one person raise their hand to sell their business and have a big wad of cash in the bank. So 50 people and 50 business owners in a room of anywhere from, probably a valuation of they could get a $250,000 to some people in the room that they sold their business, they could have $10 million in the bank, and not one raised their hand. So with all the books that you've written and the things that you've gone through and the large financial advisory firms, are you seeing a trend towards succession or businesses in perpetuity, or are you still seeing a good mix of sales versus succession?
Well, if you talk about closely held businesses in general, I think that there is a characteristic of small businesses that they tend to be an extension of the individual's personality. And one thing we know over time that only 20, maybe 25% of all small businesses make it to the second generation, and 10% make it to the third generation. So outright sales tend to be more common just because the parents may have chosen not to groom or invite their children into the business, or they may not have developed an adequate successor to run the business behind them. And we have to remember that when people start a business, they're really not thinking in terms of the ultimate liquidity event. They tend to be focusing on their passion or some technical knowledge or an invention or a creation. And then all of a sudden they wake up one day and they find out they have people and processes and controls all around them. So it has to be a conscious decision to build transferability, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the transfer has to occur to somebody inside the business. Either way you look at it, The real issue is whether you're building something to last. Are you building an enduring business? Much like a farm, where the farmland is going to continue as long as somebody is grooming it and harvesting from it and replanting and renourishing, that farm will continue in perpetuity. But for businesses, you don't have that luxury, because ideas and products and solutions become obsolete over time. And unfortunately, every business relies on people, so we have to think about the mortality of our workforce and how that will continue. So I don't know if there's naturally an increase, but I think that the probability of success, whatever that goal is going to happen if you think about how do I build the potential for transferability in the business as one of my business goals is probably a wise choice.
That's so, I try to put it as simple as possible. If a child could run your business, then it actually increases the value of it. Because if they could walk in and run all the processes, then it makes your business much more valuable, because it can fit into somebody else's, they're in their business, or they can run it with the number of people that they think that they want to. So it really comes down to, and that whole thing is coming back to one of the things you talk about in your new book is new technologies and leveraging that. So what are you seeing that in financial advice businesses, how are they using technologies to make their business more valuable or to enhance the client experience?
Well, I think that there was a threat for a long time, or perceived threat, of the emergence of robo-advisors, but the reality is that every business in the future will require some form of digital enhancement to work with their clients. The truth is that as individual clients' lives become more complex, that they can't just rely on an algorithm. They have to rely on somebody with empathy and emotion and wisdom that can help guide them. Because no decision is static. No individual has the same goals or the same risk parameters or the same fears as the other. And so it's very difficult to program for what is a very human kind of feeling. But there is a way in which to automate processes. And I think that that's probably the benefit that advisory firms are experiencing is if they can standardize that which is routine and regular, then that frees them up to focus on the life of their clients, not just on the investments of their clients. And so that perhaps is the greatest development so far. I think going forward, if I were to say what will be transformative, it will be a truly robust aggregation tool that allows you to use data to anticipate and interpret in a way you've never done before. The reports and the statements that advisors tend to deliver to their clients are pretty static, unenlightening documents. And so the question going forward is, when I look at this data, what will it tell me about the decisions I should be making going forward? Not just, is it a record of my past achievements?
Yeah, a mountain chart to review your history. So it's versus the binoculars to look to the future. So it's quite a challenge. But I think tech in general can hopefully only make things better. And so yeah, the robo advice hasn't really. I mean, and you'd know better than me, and dealing with as many financial advisors as you do. But I haven't really. Besides people getting scared of it, I haven't really seen it. I know it's there, but I haven't seen it really affect anybody's business currently. So along that line, now we're going to get into the fun questions. So what's your favorite bit of tech that you're using right now? Software, hardware, whatever it is. What's changing your life or making you happier?
Well, anything that plays music. I mean, anything that gets me away from thinking about business brings me joy. So whether it's Sonos or some other vehicle that allows me to customize my music experience to my taste, I'm pretty happy. If I can put the Imelda May playlist on my Sonos, I'm completely thrilled. So that works for me. One of the things I've been looking at, because I'm curious about it, only because it's a passion project, is an app called Autthor. which is a vehicle for allowing people to save in increments. And I'm kind of excited about getting to understand how that works a little bit better and sharing that with people as a way to create some sort of savings discipline.
And those disciplines really change people's lives. That starting early and repeating it is a big thing. But I hadn't seen Acorn yet. But that's getting people just making that regular contribution to themselves is a big thing, and even more to some of the topic we talked about earlier in the show is creating your own independence versus dependence. So you're an author. You've written lots of stuff. What are you reading? One for business and one for fun right now?
Well, I'd be reluctant to call this for fun, but it is in that category. It's called Hillbilly Elegy, which is more of a book about people who have grown up and migrated out of Kentucky, and where generational poverty is rampant, where the opioid epidemic is rampant, and how some people have managed to lift themselves out of that cycle and transform their lives. And so it's just an interesting lesson. Even though I didn't grow up in Kentucky, the place where I grew up had similar characteristics, and it's just inspiring in a way to see how that unfolds. For the business book, one I've been getting into is a book written by the relatively new CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella. It's called Hit Refresh, and it's about how over the last 4 years in particular, how Microsoft is rediscovering its soul. And what I love about this book is that it puts a great deal of emphasis on human empathy. Earlier in this discussion, I talked about how design-driven companies tend to outperform all others, and that is really the transformation that we're seeing there. On my future list, on my Kindle, I have another book called The Influential Mind, written by Tali Shuret. And what's interesting about that, particularly in a country like the U.S., is that the people seem to go against logic. That if you even present them with facts that go against their fundamental belief, they will instead try to invent reasons why their positions are correct. And obviously we've seen this in the populism that has emerged not just in the U.S. but throughout the world. That's a little disconcerting how people are ignoring facts and digging in order to continue a basic belief that just isn't true. And so it's trying to help me understand a little bit more about what drives behavior and how do we get through to people on the right levels so that they don't get entrenched in what is ultimately self-destructive behavior.
That's good. And so then, and I'll put all the notes on the thing, because I think all three of those things, hillbilly elegy is going to be quite an interesting one for anybody over in the UK that doesn't know what a hillbilly is, but I think they'll figure it out. But then the Hit Refresh, I didn't even know that was out there. But that's good. And then your latest kind of project or book, I know you've just done one in 2016. Is there another one in the making?
Not immediately. I think if I do another one, it might be a novel. I have to take my observations and turn it into something with a little more sex, a little more violence, and a little more humor. So hopefully I'll get there. But frankly, my passion project is really around my funding of a personal economics course at my former high school and grade school in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I mentioned to you about the terrible rate of illiteracy, financial illiteracy in this country, and I know that's true in the UK as well, where financial education is not mandatory for children. And unfortunately, what we've come to recognize is that the choices people make are as important as the income people make in terms of defining financial independence. So I've been supporting this program for about 8 or 9 years, and it continues to expand into not only is it a full year elective for seniors in high school, but we now have a summer camp, and we're expanding it to other school districts. In fact, about 100 other financial advisors in the U.S. have picked up similar programs to sponsor within their own communities. And it's truly transformational. You see the impact on the way kids think about their future, about the financial choices they're making, and about how they are taking control of their lives. And this is important for many reasons, but we know that today a lot of children, if asked, will say one of the biggest areas of stress in their home is the lack of financial control that their family seems to have, and that is causing them to get distracted, get discouraged, and sometimes drop out. And this becomes really perilous as we think about the futures of our countries.
That's huge, and even you working on that for years now. You've got people behind you. That's amazing, and then that also ties back into some of your favorite tech in the Acorn stuff is getting people to understand what they're doing. And we're doing a similar project over here with a company called Black Bullion that's basically going in and teaching 13, 14-year-olds about credit cards and debt and savings and pensions and things like that. And if the people that make the money and help them with the money don't actually talk to people about it, then it's kind of, we're letting down the people that we serve. So it's good. So going all that stuff, we've gone through some great books. We've talked about how to change people's businesses. We talked about valuing them. One final thought for our listeners from Mark Tibergien.
Well, I think that if I'm in financial services today, I would have to be truly excited. This is one of those few industries where there's an oversupply of customers and an undersupply of providers. It's an industry where you have a degree of independence, you're intellectually stimulated, you're financially rewarded, and on top of all that, you profoundly impact the lives of other people. So when you think about career choices for you and for those who follow you, it's really a wonderful profession to pick for all of those reasons. And so if I were starting over, I would definitely consider this as a career path for me.
Very cool. So yeah, you change lives and definitely steer them in the right direction. So thank you very much, Mark Tibergien, for being on the podcast today, and thank you very much for all the information. And everybody will be able to get this, and YouTube has the transcript, so you'll be able to download it. And where can we actually track you down, and what do you want us to look for when we find you on the internet, Mark?
Well, just keep looking for Pershing.com. Anything that we're doing, or in the UK, Pershing.co or .uk.co. As a company, we are in the business of supporting the financial industry and in all of its manifestations, and we love our ability to help this profession grow into what it could be.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thanks, BD.
Thanks for joining us on Grow, Sell, and Retire. For more information, tools, or to book one of our team members to work with your team, business, or to speak at your event or conference, visit bartdaltonconsulting.com or email contact@bartdaltonconsulting.com. Buy the book True Gravity on Amazon. If you want to work for the rest of your life, that is your business. If you don't, that is ours.